I'm going to be talking about supply chain volatility in the construction industry. I think we can see what's happening just on the road, long fuel queues, and it's quite worrying and thinking about what's actually happening. What are the causes of that volatility? Just as been said, I've worked on large complex projects. I've never seen this volatility in the last 20 years. It's causing a challenge for us, our clients, in terms of how do we redesign our supply chains, how do we redesign our contracts, and even thinking of paying materials in advance, which most public sector organizations are quite risk averse. They sort of don't want to do that. But we are forced to rethink our strategy. So, construction is experiencing unprecedented, uncertain times due to price volatility of labor and materials, in addition, shortage of labor and materials. And you can see what's going on, long queues, and we hear this is a foretaste of things to come when it comes to material shortages. So what experts are saying, it's just the beginning. And it's going to take maybe about 12 months for the situation to stabilize. As you can see, top consultants, one of UK's petrol crisis is a foretaste of what's coming construction's way. What are the causes? Obviously, the first one, just like putting Brexit, easy one, isn't it? Second one is COVID, but there are other factors as well. Just across the pond in America, they're experiencing the same thing. So this is a global problem. UK is competing with Europe, with America for materials, and there's a shortage of them. In America, the Fortune 1000 companies, the largest 1,000 companies, are seeing supply chain disruption. And 75% are seeing the negative impact on their business. And 55% are actually thinking that it's going to reduce their growth outlook. Let's talk about Brexit. In construction, the situation is complicated by the transition from CE to UK CA marking. Unfortunately, there's insufficient product testing capacity. I'm going to talk about it later. And establishing of new cross-border systems and processing is creating a constraint or a bottleneck. Then, of course, new EU immigration rules. Why are we transitioning from CE to UK CA marking? Because we need our own standards. We have left the EU, and we have to show that the products meet essential health, safety, and environmental protection legislation. And this has to be done by the end of 2021. And time is running out. There is a limited transition period exacerbated by lack of approved bodies and just availability of capacity. So there are calls for this to be extended by a year or even more. Now, the new cross-border systems and processes have introduced new checks and paperwork for goods imported from the EU. Traders are now facing delays, and the introduction of new levies, fees, or tariffs is not helping. Then, with regards to the immigration rules, 20,000 drivers left for their home countries In addition to that, low-skilled workers are not eligible for permits under the new immigration rules. COVID, that's another one. The rapidly rising freight costs and container availability and global transportation challenges, a shortage of raw materials, and a shortage of available drivers and capacity as well. And then Suez Canal blockage. We know about that, so there's a backlog within the supply chain as well. And that blockage in March triggered a surge in container spot freight rates. And just the demand for container shipping has just grown during the pandemic due to changes in consumer patterns and a surge in e-commerce. Demand was stronger than expected, and it's not met with sufficient supply of shipping. So there's a constraint in the shipping system as well. The underlying causes are more complex. They include changing trade patterns and imbalances, and capacity management by carriers, and also new ways of working which have been implemented by COVID. Shipping costs are rising as well, and they're here to stay for at least 12 months. Then there's shortage of global raw materials. Construction is ramping up. It's build, but demand is not being met with supply. Easier one to blame, obviously, HS2, the mega project, sucking a lot of resources. And it's the big contractors who can forward buy. Small contractors can't compete. And there's limited availability of products, especially from China, such as copper and steel. And we know what's happening to steel prices, just going up. Now there's limited capacity in China as well, the Chinese ports. And as I said before, the Suez Canal blockage didn't help. Smaller companies are affected. They can't forward buy. They don't have the big pockets of the big boys and girls, and they're struggling. Now, there's just a shortage of drivers. 100,000 drivers. We've got a shortage of 100,000 drivers, and this won't be solved quickly. The contributing factors are slow recruitment process with many pandemic cancellations, so there's a backlog. And there's also 40,000 cancelled tests. And of course, we've spoken of all the drivers from Europe who went back home. There are also other factors that are affecting, that are causing shortage of drivers. Tax charges, most of them are self-employed, and there's a R35 increase in NI, it's just not helping. There's also a lot of drivers that are approaching retirement, and challenging working conditions in comparison to Europe. Some drivers are saying that in Europe, there are better working conditions, they are respected. Some are spending too much time away from home, and it's not seen as an attractive job. And there's just increased competition from drivers, especially from Europe. Some drivers would prefer to actually be based in Europe. But also there are underlying issues within the supply chain. There's a lack of resilience in the supply chain. It's not responsive enough. And this goes across countries. Supply chain operations are becoming more costly, and There's lack of flexibility, which just inhibits the ability to address customer demands. IT systems are old, they need to be upgraded, and they're quite expensive. What are the solutions? Solutions can be found at 4 levels: the government, the client organizations, contractors, and suppliers. What can the government do? The project pipeline has just been published, but do we have to deliver all those projects now? The government has to review the project pipeline again and do the critical ones first. Loosening of immigration rules, as we've seen recently, just a week ago, and extend the transition period for the UK CA marking. And also allow the products to be both CE marking and UK CA marking. Policymakers need to look at reforms around trade to make it easier and less costly. That's a challenge because Brexit, created that challenge. So government has to think about that. And also just promoting transparency within the maritime supply chain. What about clients? What do? They have to regularly review supply chain risks with contractors and suppliers. There has to be collaboration in that review. And when it comes to construction contracts, they have to be slightly tweaked to make sure that the contractors are not taking on the risk. If you cannot forecast the price of steel in the next 3 months, how can you deliver a project, for example, in a lump sum contract? Contractors, are coming back to us saying, look, this is not possible. And we know the principles of lump sum contract, it's price-based, and you take the risk of price increases. But in a period of huge volatility, you just can't do that. Even indices don't work because there's a lag. So you might have to carve out the most expensive packages or materials that are arising from that contract. And the rest can be price-based because they can price in the risk. And also, clients have to consider contractual incentives for contractors to achieve program dates so that they keep on mitigating the risks. It's not all about the client taking on the risk of rising materials, but also incentivizing contractors to mitigate that risk as well. Also, design. You have to think about design changes to allow substitute materials. And also, we've got to allow for longer mobilization periods and lead-in periods. As I said before, clients have to start thinking about upfront ordering, advance payments. Obviously, it comes with its own risks. What about contractors? They also have to be involved with clients and suppliers in the review of their supply chain, monitoring supply chain risks. And they also have to include new contractual provisions to address this volatility and implement a robust risk management framework for them to be resilient in their risk management process. There are 5 key actions to address COVID's impact on logistics: improve visibility, increase the flexibility, communicate across the supply chain, support your workforce. It's very important. And just be a responsible steward of the supply chain. Think creatively. And think how you're going to support your customers, your suppliers, in your logistics network that are affected by COVID. Suppliers at the front end or core phase, they should assess and identify risk at each value chain node. They should also have supply chain risk management framework, improve visibility to get real-time visibility into operations, monitor risks and field real-time information to clients and contractors. Communication has to be effective. Again, just like contractors, support your workforce and think creatively. So, COVID and supply chain disruptions are here for a while. Brexit will bring challenges. So it's very important for collaboration between the government, contractors and suppliers, and client organizations to monitor risks continuously and to mitigate those supply chain risks. Government legislation should be flexible. It's all good, I work in public sector, and when you have carried out your tender process and awarded a contract, there's a limit to how much you can change that contract, because that distorts competition. You're already favoring the winning bidder. And that creates a challenge under public procurement regulations, where you've awarded a contract, and then suddenly you've got to make material changes to that contract to allow for price volatility, to mitigate for price volatility. And so legislation should be flexible. Right now it's not, but the government should act quickly. Yeah, so that's it, basically.
Thank you, Kuda.
Yes.
I know we have some questions that have come in, so if we could have some of those on the screen. Okay, excellent. Now, obviously, you've ran through a lot of the issues that we're very familiar with at the moment that we're facing here in the UK as well. And I suppose what we're really looking for is, what measures can be taken or what solutions we could actually use. So I'm actually going to go to the second one here, the question here from James. How can artificial intelligence be leveraged to predict these risks, or how can it be used to ensure that they don't happen again, if it can?
True. I think what has happened is these supply chain disruptions have exposed weaknesses in the global supply chains, so across countries.
Yeah.
We've got legacy IT systems that are not able to address the current risks and dynamic environment. And artificial intelligence is quite important in terms of actually being able to provide real-time information end to end.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge, but it's going to take a while. But there is there are software companies out there that are promoting this, and I think clients, especially contractors and suppliers, who should adopt that. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say as well that construction as an industry has always been accused of being a little bit behind the curve when it comes to adopting technology. Do you think that the industry is getting better at that and catching up?
I think it's a struggle in the construction industry. We're always behind. I don't know why. I think it's just to do with maybe the education system, how we are taught, and so I think we have to look at the education system itself.
Yeah.
For example, we've got the architectural degree, and I've spoken to some architectural practices who are employing 23-year-olds who can do 3D drawings, because they say they can just do just as much as an architect.
Yeah.
They're introduced to these standards and they're trained in-house. And so I think the education system also needs to change so that it's dynamic enough to address these challenges that we face.
I suppose it's self-fulfilling in a way, because as the industry gets more technologically advanced, it's naturally going to require people with those skills anyway, but it almost feels like construction's been almost resistant to that. Is that because construction is a slow industry to embrace change, because a lot of the projects are so huge and also take so long, like, you know, HS2, for instance, or anything else, right?
Yeah. I mean, for example, HS2, some people ask, why don't we have the maglev, you know, the floating trains?
Yeah.
Why are we spending $1 billion and not having the floating trains, and everywhere else they are building them? So these are some of the challenges that sometimes, I think in construction, we've always traditionally, you know, maybe 20 or 30 years behind.
20 or 30?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's quite a challenge now, because the fourth industrial revolution, where the IT systems are rapidly changing and construction has to move quickly. I mean, we've got building information modeling, that's building in 3D, everybody collaborates, and that's sort of taking shape, albeit slowly.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's have a look at some of these questions here.
Yeah.
This could be controversial. Did the government get it wrong when it came to Brexit's impact on supply chain? In terms of like the change in regulations and the lorry drivers not being able to get their visas to come and work here, or is it just a perfect storm of all of those factors that you talked about?
All right, okay. I'm not speaking on behalf of Parliament.
Of course.
I'm not speaking on behalf of government.
This is just between us. Just between us, no one's here.
I'm just a voter as well.
Yeah.
I question whether there was some modeling in terms of scenario planning.
Yeah.
What could happen, what if, and what. You know, it looks like maybe those models didn't work or they were not applied. I think the government has been slow in terms of responding to issues, you know, fuel crisis, the shortages. These things should have been foreseen 2 years ago, because Brexit itself creates a constraint. You know, so how do you deal with that constraint? We should have modeled that 2 years ago, so that it doesn't happen, so that we don't become reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah.
Did they get it wrong? You know, when I'm driving outside and see these fuel queues and getting frustrated, you know, yeah.
Yeah, like you say,
I think there's a problem there.
Yeah, there's obviously a problem, and I think a lot of people probably could have predicted that problem. Like you say, either the modelling wasn't done or it wasn't done, you know, properly.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's a situation that isn't just impacting the UK, because there's a shortage of drivers elsewhere as well.
Yeah, but it's not only the issue of Brexit. As I said before, it's to do with this supply chain not being able to meet rapid demand. And then it's a constrained supply chain. Remember, in those countries, that people are beginning to go back to work, and they were working maybe at 50% capacity, and there's huge demand here. And these things, materials might take about 3-6 months to come. And the materials that are arriving now were planned 6 months ago, maybe when in China, they were at 50% capacity. So we are feeling it now.
Yeah.
So it's not only Brexit that has disrupted the supply chain. It's to do with, you know, just underlying issues within the supply chain itself. It's quite limited. It's been slow to respond.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I'm not blaming Brexit on my inability to get petrol on the way home tonight.
That's right.
Okay, so how can construction? Oh, go ahead.
Thanks so much. Sorry. You talked on some strategies that you utilise for price volatility. For materials which you can't source at all, you know, i.e. semiconductors, or at the moment the shortages in PVC piping, for example, what are some of the strategies you've employed to make sure projects don't grind to a halt?
I think this is where you're going to have to review your pipeline and be realistic in terms of leading times. You're going to have to increase the leading times, speak to your suppliers back in China or Malaysia, whichever country they are in, and just become realistic. There's going to have to be a delay. Why? Because the supply is constrained. Yes, there might be a huge demand on this end, but there's nothing much we can do. And it's going to be a painful 12 months, I should say. Yeah.
So are there any more? I didn't ask earlier. Are there any more questions from the floor? No, okay. Let's just take one more question then that came in online. I'm going to take the top one, actually. I think we've talked about the UK government's response to this enough. How can construction businesses bounce back from COVID? I realise that's a very big question. And
it's a big question.
It's a long answer, but what are some simple measures that they can take? And is using this as an opportunity to embrace technology, is that one of the things that can really help them right now?
Yeah, embracing technology, being realistic in terms of the availability of materials. Demand will keep on increasing. You've got to increase the lead times. But I'm impressed by what contractors are doing out there in terms of even COVID testing mechanisms and new ways of working. They seem to have adapted quickly. So I think in terms of COVID, they're managing the risk quite perfectly. So I'm quite impressed with that. But it's the bouncing back is, again, it's limited. You can't, we are constrained in terms of how we can bounce back because of the supply chain constraints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, in addition, border checks and all that. So it's two things, really.
It's tough right now, isn't it?
It is tough. Whoever thought this could happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, all right, that's all we've got time for now. So thank you, Kuda.
Yes.
Thank you. Just take that. Thank you, Kuda. Just want to make sure I've safe.